I knew something was wrong before I even saw the water. That's the part that still sticks with me. You spend your whole life walking the same land. You notice little things. The way the wind cuts through cedar trees. The smell of wet clay after rain. Even the silence feels familiar out there. So when I drove through the south pasture that morning and everything suddenly felt off, my stomach tightened before my brain even caught up. Then I came over the ridge, and there it was. A full-blown pond sitting on my property like it had always belonged there. Fresh dirt piled 10 feet high, muddy banks carved clean through my grazing field, water already collecting from the spring creek my granddad used to fish out of back in the 60s. I just sat there in my truck staring at it with both hands on the wheel thinking, there ain't no way somebody actually did this. My name's Wade Mercer, and my family owns a little over 500 acres outside Jasper County, Kentucky, mostly hardwood timber, some rolling pasture, couple old barns leaning harder every year but somehow still standing. My grandfather bought the land after coming home from Korea, paid for it one miserable cattle season at a time. Folks around here know the Mercer property because the southern boundary has this old stacked limestone fence running almost a mile through the woods. It's ancient, probably older than the county itself. My dad used to tell me that wall will still be standing after all of us are gone. Turns out he was right. About a year before all this happened, a couple from Charlotte bought the estate bordering my south line. Brent and Elise Holloway, money people, you could tell immediately. The kind that wear hiking boots that have never seen mud and call the countryside charming every other sentence. Their place used to belong to an old cattle rancher named Don Wilkes, and when Don passed, his kids sold it off for some insane amount of money. Soon as the Holloways moved in, contractors started showing up non-stop. Landscaping crews, gate installers, luxury cabin designers, all these shiny trucks rolling through roads that used to seem more dear than people. Now honestly, at first, I tried to like Brent. I really did. First time we met, I was clearing storm damage near the limestone wall when he rolled up in one of those expensive side-by-sides with leather seats and a Bluetooth speaker blasting country music that sounded manufactured in a lab somewhere. He hopped out smiling like a politician at a ribbon cutting. "You Wade?" he asked. I told him yeah, and he stuck his hand out real confident, like we were already buddies. Said they'd been looking for a peaceful escape from city life. I remember laughing a little and saying, well, you definitely picked the right county if peace is what you're after. Then I pointed at the old stone wall and told him straight up, that's the property line there. Always has been. He nodded, barely looked at it, then changed the subject to ATV trails and fishing plans. That should have told me everything right there. About 2 months later, my younger brother called, saying he needed help moving his family down to Tennessee after some factory closure put him out of work. I was gone longer than expected, close to 9 weeks altogether between helping him settle in and dealing with my mother's health stuff at the same time. By the time I got back home, I was exhausted, mentally, physically, emotionally. All I wanted was one quiet afternoon checking fences and feeding cattle. Instead, I found a damn lake. I pulled closer and noticed excavator tracks crossing through my pasture. Half my cedar grove had been bulldozed flat. There were PVC drainage pipes sticking out of the dirt and a brand new floating dock tied near the far bank like somebody was planning a damn vacation brochure photo shoot out there. What really set me over the edge, though, they were using my spring water. That springs fed this property for generations. During drought years, that creek kept our cattle alive. I grabbed my phone and called Brent right there standing beside the water. And the crazy thing is, he answered cheerful. Wade, hey buddy, what's going on? Buddy, I said, tell me why there's a pond sitting 40 yards onto my property. There was this little pause. Not panic, not confusion, annoyance. Then he goes, oh that. Yeah, our contractor handled all the surveying before excavation started. I remember looking around at the destruction thinking, this man really believes paperwork changes where dirt's been sitting for 150 years. I told him, that limestone wall marks the boundary. Always has. And his voice changed immediately. Well, according to our survey guy, that wall's not legally accurate anymore. Not legally accurate anymore. Like history just expired because some rich guy from Charlotte wanted waterfront views. And standing there beside that muddy water, hearing this stranger explain my own land to me like I was confused, I realized this wasn't going to be some simple misunderstanding. This was about pride now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could picture was that pond sitting there like a scar carved straight through my family's history. What bothered me most wasn't even the dirt work. It was the attitude behind it. Brent talked to me like I was some stubborn old local who didn't understand progress. Like money and contractors somehow overruled generations of boundary lines. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Next morning, I called Raymond Pike. Now, if you grew up around Jasper County, you know Raymond. Man's been surveying land since cassette tapes were still a thing. Quiet guy. Always smells faintly like coffee and chainsaw fuel. Carries rolled-up maps in the back seat of his truck like sacred documents. He surveyed my timber tract back in 2016 after a logging dispute with another neighbor, so I trusted him completely. I told him what happened, and there was this long silence on the phone before he finally said, "Wade, don't touch anything till I get there." That sentence alone told me this was bigger than I thought. Raymond showed up 2 days later with old county plats, deed records, and one of those GPS survey rigs that looks expensive enough to launch satellites. We spent almost 6 hours walking the limestone wall through the woods. He'd stop every few yards, check coordinates, hammer little orange flags into the ground, then shake his head under his breath. Finally, we got near the pond edge and he just stood there staring across the water. Then he looked at me and said, "They didn't barely cross the line. They steamrolled right over it." Turns out nearly the entire pond basin sat inside my boundary, 43 yards at the deepest point. They'd also destroyed part of an underground spring channel that fed into my creek system. Raymond explained that restoring natural water flow alone could cost a fortune if the soil compacted wrong. I asked him, "How does somebody screw up this bad?" He gave me this tired little laugh and said, "Simple. They hired someone willing to tell them what they wanted to hear." That line stayed with me. Raymond filed the official boundary report 3 days later. Certified copies went to Brent, the county land office, and the excavation contractor, a company called Ridgeline Earthworks. Their owner, Travis Boone, called me personally after he got the paperwork. At first, he acted defensive. "Look, man, we were provided survey stakes," I said. "Then your survey stakes were garbage." He kept talking over me trying to sound professional, but I could hear nerves creeping into his voice. Finally, I asked him one simple question. "You ever verify county records yourself before moving 40,000 cubic yards of dirt?" Silence. Then he muttered, "That's usually handled beforehand." Exactly. Nobody checked because nobody cared enough to check. A week later, Brent sent back a formal response through some expensive law firm in Charlotte. Whole thing read like corporate perfume. Polished words covering up arrogance. According to them, the pond location was based on reasonable professional assessment, and any dispute should remain pending until court review. Pending. Meanwhile, they kept building. That's the part that drove everybody around here crazy. See? Word travels fast in small counties. By then, people had started hearing about the lake dispute, and every gas station conversation somehow circled back to it. Some folks thought Brent honestly got scammed by bad contractors. Others figured he knew exactly what he was doing from the beginning. But once they started adding luxury features after receiving legal notice, public opinion shifted hard. I drove by one afternoon and nearly lost my mind. They'd installed 2 decorative fountains in the middle of the pond. Fountains. There were landscapers planting willow trees along my pasture edge like they were building some resort community. A crew was assembling a cedar fishing dock with built-in lighting while Brent stood there drinking iced coffee, pointing at things like a movie producer. I parked and walked straight toward him. The workers got real quiet when they saw me coming. Brent turned around smiling, but it wasn't friendly anymore. It was smug, like he thought money had already decided the outcome. I asked him, "You really gonna keep building after getting served official notice?" He shrugged. "My attorney advised us to continue improvements until a judge says otherwise." That sentence right there, that's when something shifted in me. Because suddenly this wasn't about confusion or bad surveying anymore. This man knew the risk. He just assumed consequences wouldn't apply to him. I remember pointing at the water and saying, "You're building your dream property using my land." And Brent actually laughed. Not nervous laughter either. Real laughter. Then he goes, "Wade, no offense, but this county's been stuck in the past a long time. People move down here because they want something better." I swear my vision blurred for a second. Not because of the insult. I've been insulted before, but because of how casually he dismissed generations of people like they were obstacles instead of human beings. My grandfather poured concrete by hand to save this land during flood seasons. My dad rebuilt fencing after tornadoes, reburied family dogs under oak trees out there, and this guy looked at all of it like undeveloped scenery waiting for an upgrade. I stepped closer and told him quietly, "You better hope that Judge sees things your way." Then I left before I said something uglier. Court took 11 weeks. Longest 11 weeks of my life. Every few days I drive out to check the property and see more additions. They stocked bass and bluegill, installed gravel paths, put Adirondack chairs near the shoreline. Elise started posting sunset photos online talking about lake life. My lake life, apparently. Meanwhile, Raymond kept gathering historical evidence. Old aerial photos, original deed transfers dating back to the 1800s, even testimony from elderly locals who remembered repairing sections of the limestone wall decades ago. The deeper we dug, the stronger the case became. Then court day finally arrived. Brent showed up wearing a tailored navy suit like he was attending a real estate conference. Elise sat beside him looking irritated more than nervous. Their attorney talked for almost 40 minutes straight, using phrases like good faith development and unclear historical demarcation, tried to paint the whole thing as some unfortunate misunderstanding between modern surveying and outdated landmarks. Then Judge Harriet Coleman asked one question. If the boundary was unclear, why continue construction after formal notice was issued? And man, you could feel the entire room change. Brent's attorney stumbled through some answer about ongoing contractual obligations, but the damage was done. Judge Coleman spent less than 15 minutes reviewing Raymond's survey maps before leaning back in her chair and saying words I'll never forget. The historical limestone boundary is both legally recognized and extensively documented. The excavation in question exists entirely on Mr. Mercer's property. Entirely. Not partially. Not debatably. Entirely. Then she looked directly at Brent and said, "You are ordered to restore the plaintiff's land to original grade and condition within 21 days. Failure to comply authorizes the plaintiff to complete restoration independently at defendant expense." You ever hear a rich man realize money can't save him in real time? Because I have. Brent's whole expression changed, like somebody finally unplugged whatever fantasy he'd been living in. But here's the crazy part. Even after losing in court, he still didn't fix it. 21 days came and went, and that pond stayed exactly where it was. No crews showed up, no excavation equipment, no attempt to drain the water or restore the pasture. Nothing. It was almost impressive in a stupid kind of way. Like Brent genuinely believed if he ignored the court order long enough, reality would eventually bend around him. Day 22, Raymond called me and said, "Well, looks like he made his choice." And honestly, I think that was the moment I finally stopped being angry. Up until then, I'd been carrying this knot in my chest every day, replaying conversations, imagining arguments, wondering how people get arrogant enough to steal land with a straight face. But once Brent ignored the judge too, something in me settled. Because now, it wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. The law had spoken, and he decided he was above it. That made the next step real easy. I called Dalton Kerr over at Iron Ridge Excavation. Dalton's one of those old-school equipment operators who looks permanently covered in dust no matter how much he showers. Been moving earth around Kentucky hills for over 30 years. Doesn't say much unless he has something worth saying. I explained the court order, and before I even finished, he goes, "So, we're deleting a lake." I laughed for the first time in weeks. 3 mornings later, right at sunrise, Dalton rolled onto my property with 2 bulldozers, an excavator, 4 dump trucks, and enough diesel noise to wake every crow in 3 counties. Raymond came too, mostly to document everything for legal protection. We had copies of the court order in every truck just in case Brent decided to create a scene. And deep down, I knew he would. The pond looked different that morning. Smaller somehow. Sadder. Maybe because for the first time since this whole thing started, it finally looked temporary. Dalton climbed down from his dozer, spit tobacco into the grass, studied the water a minute, then looked at me and said, "Hell of a place to build something illegal." Then the machine started moving. There's something weirdly satisfying about watching dirt return where it belongs. The excavator tore through the fishing dock first, snapping cedar beams like toothpicks. One of the fountains tipped sideways into the muddy water and disappeared with this pathetic little splash. Bulldozers pushed shoreline berms inward, while dump trucks hauled back soil that had been piled near my tree line for months. By noon, the luxury lake looked more like a construction wound being stitched closed. Around 2 o'clock, Brent finally showed up. Of course he did. He came flying down the gravel road in a black SUV, throwing dust everywhere. jumped out before the engine even stopped running. Elise came scrambling after him wearing sunglasses big enough to hide half her face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled. Dalton didn't even shut off the bulldozer. I handed Brent a copy of the court order and said, "You had 21 days. He looked around at the equipment like he couldn't process what he was seeing. I think part of him truly believed nobody would ever challenge him this far. Guys like Brent spend their whole lives throwing money at problems until people back down. But dirt's different. Land remembers things." He kept shouting about investments and property damage while Raymond quietly photographed every stage of restoration. At one point, Brent threatened to sue everybody involved, and Dalton actually laughed out loud from inside the dozer cab. That made Brent even madder. The whole thing probably lasted 10 minutes before he realized nobody was stopping. Nobody was intimidated. The law was already settled. So he just stood there helpless while his dream pond disappeared bucket by bucket. And I'd be lying if I said that wasn't satisfying to watch. By the third day, the basin was completely filled. Dalton graded the pasture back to natural contour so smoothly you almost couldn't tell a pond had ever been there. Raymond supervised restoration around the spring channel to make sure water flow stabilized properly again. We reseeded damaged ground, replaced fencing sections crushed by excavation traffic, and hauled away every last piece of construction debris. When it was over, I walked that property alone near sunset. No machines, no shouting, no fountains, just wind moving through cedar trees again. I stood near the restored creek bank where my grandfather used to bring me fishing when I was little, and for the first time in months, the place actually felt like home again. Funny thing is, I didn't feel victorious exactly. Mostly I felt relieved, like some imbalance finally got corrected. Brent did sue afterward, by the way, claimed financial damages for destruction of private recreational improvements. Judge Coleman dismissed it so fast it almost felt disrespectful. Then she ordered him to reimburse my legal fees, survey costs, timber loss, and spring restoration expenses. Altogether, it cost him just under $80,000, not counting what he originally spent building the pond in the first place. And here's the part people around here still talk about. About a year and a half later, the Holloways sold the estate, quietly. No goodbye party. No community involvement. Just packed moving trucks and a realtor sign out front one morning. Last I heard, they moved somewhere outside Nashville looking for more development opportunities, which honestly sounds about right. Now, every once in a while, somebody asks if I would have handled things differently, maybe tried harder to compromise, maybe let them keep part of the pond in exchange for money. Truth is, no, because if somebody can bulldoze history, ignore boundaries, dismiss local people, then still expect sympathy when consequences show up, that's not a misunderstanding anymore. That's entitlement. And entitlement only grows when nobody pushes back. So I want to ask you something. If your neighbor built something massive on your property, then acted like you were the problem for objecting, what would you have done? Would you have settled, taken the money, or brought in the bulldozers too? Let me know down in the comments, because around here, people still argue about it to this day.